Welcome to another episode of the Move Smartly Show. Today, we're going to be talking about multi-unit housing, and specifically, we're going to be looking at one of the cities in Canada that has probably done the most to encourage more housing and more high-density housing in existing neighborhoods. And that municipality, of course, is Edmonton. They've legalized eightplexes. And today we're going to talk about what is going on in Edmonton. How do they get to legalizing eightplexes? What do eightplexes look like in Edmonton compared to the multiplexes in Toronto? What the uplift is and how many people are building them. And we're going to be talking about some of the pushback we're seeing and hearing from the municipalities, from residents trying to scale down this type of housing in existing neighborhoods. To do that, we're going to be joined by Jacob Dawang, who's part of the Edmonton Pro Housing Group Grow Together, who's going to be looking at and unpacking many of these different issues with us today. I hope you enjoy this week's episode. All right, Jacob, thank you so much for taking the time to join me on this week's Move Smartly episode to chat about multi-unit housing in Edmonton.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Perfect. So, I thought it'd be a good time for a couple of reasons. Obviously, Edmonton has been pushing forward with higher density housing for quite some time. We're starting to see some pushback in Edmonton. As a result of that, there is a municipal election coming up. So I thought it'd be a good opportunity to chat about these issues, get some background, obviously for Torontonians to kind of better understand what is going on in Edmonton, and some context on all the issues going on with the policies out there. So why don't we kick things off by you just maybe giving us a bit of a background? I mean, of course, the big news, the things that we hear about a lot are that Edmonton legalized eightplexes, which are 8 units on a particular lot. You know, Toronto legalized fourplexes a couple of years ago and sixplexes in some areas. So maybe you can give us some background into when this was legalized and kind of the progression to get there. I mean, did Edmonton legalize fourplexes first and then eightplexes, and maybe give us a little bit of background on some of the policy decisions in Edmonton that got to this point?
Right. So the big headliner number, as you've said, is eight plexes. But this was part of a broader initiative called the Zoning Bylaw Renewal, which here in Edmonton we refer to as ZBR. That was passed in 2023 by council and came into force in January 2024. And that simplified and modernized zoning, consolidated a bunch of residential zones, essentially rewrote the zoning bylaw from scratch. And part of that was allowing up to 8 units in the core older suburbs and mature neighborhoods on any residential lot. But before that, as I was alluding to, there was sort of a variety of residential zones that covered the city, and some of them allowed less housing, some of them allowed more. But by the time we got to 2020, even the beginning of 2019, each of those residential zones allowed at least duplexes, each with a secondary suite and a garden suite in the backyard. So by that point, we had at least allowed fourplexes, and going back even further, we allowed lots subdivision, skinny homes. So it's been quite a journey incrementally increasing the permissions to build housing in these neighborhoods up till today, where you have the eightplexes in mature neighborhoods.
So that's helpful. Okay, so it's been a progression. I think what's interesting is that, as you said, for quite some time before the eightplex were legalized, it sounds like they were legalized fourplexes. Now, when you say fourplexes, is that like triplex plus an accessory dwelling unit is generally what most areas were allowing?
So in most, it depends on the specific zone, but generally what was actually being built, and I think we'll get around to this, is uh, semi-detached or what we would call front-back duplexes, each with a secondary suite. So think generally a semi-detached home, each with a basement suite.
Interesting. Okay. So when you say front back duplexes, what do you mean by? I mean, I think the terminology is interesting because obviously every city has different housing types. You know, what we call a semi-detached home in Toronto, I know in some areas people refer to them as duplexes, and here duplexes are not necessarily semi-detached homes. So, what do you mean by front back semis?
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. Essentially, instead of dividing the home side by side, you're dividing it front to back
Oh, interesting.
while still having the entrance for the back unit face the front. So you can sort of imagine there's like two two side two boxes that are sort of offset, and
I
then
see.
you can enter the back box because
Okay.
it's offset, and each of them has a basement suite.
Okay, that's helpful. So it sounds like, of course, one of the big changes you mentioned is that they streamlined, of course, the zoning and rewrote it to make everything a little bit simpler. Now, when they legalized eightplexes, maybe you can kind of unpack, some of the requirements for that, because again, I mean, we live in Toronto. You think eightplexes, are they building eightplexes on a 20-foot wide lot or a 20-foot wide lot, which I'm going to actually hit pause because you used a term which I thought was funny too. I think you called them skinnies or something like that. And I heard in Edmonton they refer to homes on 25-foot lots or something like that as skinnies, which is actually quite normal in Toronto. So it kind of gives you some kind of context for, what is normal in one municipality is obviously not normal in another. So, what are some of the basic requirements for building, 8 units on a lot? Because it sounds like a lot in the context of the small lots in Toronto, but the lots are actually quite different in Edmonton.
Yeah, so there are some differences between the lots in Toronto and Edmonton. Of course, as you were saying, the lots tend to be larger. In a lot of the older neighborhoods, there tends to be alleys that run behind houses. So
Mm.
there's direct access if you want to put a garage there, which generally builders do. But the basic rule for multiplexes or eightplexes, row houses in Edmonton is that you need to have at least 75 square meters per dwelling unit. And this applies whether you're on a corner, whether you're on an interior lot. So that's where you get the commonly cited figure of eightplexes must have 600 square meters of lot area uh, to be allowed to be built. So that naturally precludes dividing up lots to a tiny size and building as many units as you want. Now, on a corner lot, given that that's been thought of to be less disruptive, that's where there's no longer the 8 unit hard cap. There's also, you just have to go with the 75 square meter soft cap that scales with the lot area. But on interior lots where you have a lot from on either side, that's where you have the hard cap of 8 units.
Okay, so I
Um,
mean, just to unpack some of these numbers, because I know cities in Edmonton and Toronto like to talk about things in square meters. I think all of us, for some reason, are still stuck in Imperial when it comes to area. We all think of square feet. So just to unpack some of those ideas and those numbers that you share. Um, so the minimum unit size is 75 square meters, which probably is about 800 square feet. So that is the minimum size of a unit in a home. And then and correct me if I'm wrong, and then the minimum lot area, which is sort of the lot size to build a eightplex, is 600 square meters, which has got to work out to, I don't know, just under 7,000 square feet or something like that, or 6,800, I can't remember, but over 6,000 square feet, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, just a small correction on there's
sure.
no there's no specific unit area requirement. It's all based on lot area per unit. So like the 75 square meters is per unit of lot area. So it doesn't say that your unit has to be at least 800, I think you said 800
Square
square
feet.
feet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that there has to be 800 square feet of lot area per unit. So
No,
if
no,
you
no.
take
That's
this,
I
oh, that's
thought
what you were saying.
sorry. I thought the requirement was that the minimum unit size is 75 square meters.
It's the minimum lot area per unit.
Oh, the minimum lot area per unit.
Yeah.
Oh,
So let's say you have, so if you take 75 times 8, that's where you get the, I believe that's where you get the 600, if I'm doing my math correctly,
close.
or
Yeah. Okay.
close.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Whatever 75 times 8 is, that's what the minimum is for eightplexes. And and so, for example, if you had 525 square meters, if that was your lot area, then you'd be allowed to build seven. And if you had 75 meters squared less, then
I
you'd be
see.
allowed to build
Okay, so that's
six, and
that's
so
super
forth.
helpful. So thank you for clearing that. So they don't have a minimum unit size, but they have a minimum lot area per unit. And for the Aplex, as you said, it ends up working out to about over a 6,000 square foot lot, which for context for Torontonians, I mean, this is basically going to be a 60 by 110 lot, which is a huge lot, for Toronto standards. Which if you actually think about it, is actually not that different from Toronto's fourplexes, because here we would typically have two 30-foot lots side by side, each with four units, which is kind of the same thing as having, 8 units on a 600 square meter lot. So in some ways, it seems quite similar, but it sounds obviously quite significant because your lots are quite larger there.
Yeah, for sure. And, on top of the that basic requirement, there's additional design requirements that have actually changed in the past couple months. In July, there was a public hearing where council changed some of the rules to make it a little bit more restrictive. So there's regulations on building depth, how essentially how deep into the lot you can build your home, uh, how many side entrances you can have, side setbacks, rear setbacks, front setbacks, all the usual stuff that comes with residential zones.
Okay. Now, I mean, one thing I wanted to chat about, I mean, going back to this idea of different terms and housing types in different cities, maybe you can kind of describe what eightplexes look like. Because when I saw a lot, I mean, I browsed a bunch that were even publicly for sale, even on realtor.ca. I mean, it's very interesting that they're actually quite different from, visually from what we would think of as an eightplex in Toronto. So maybe we can talk a little bit about what they're building in Edmonton.
Yeah, so there's not great hard data on this, but from my own looking around at the stuff that has been built, or that most of which is in the process of being built, that since being permitted in 2024, is what we call the four up, four down. So just like an evolution of the front backs duplexes, each with a secondary suite, what we're seeing now is four units on the top. So four primary units, each with a secondary or basement suite. And those are the down units. So that's what we've been seeing so far since the beginning of 2024. Some of them have had side entrances only, although that is no longer allowed. So we'll see an evolution of that form, but that seems to be the most popular way of laying out the units. I'm not exactly sure why. Some builders that I've talked to have said it has to do with the fireproofing requirements, whereas if you build in a different way, that you have to have both horizontal and vertical fire separation. But if you build in this way, then you don't have to, you only need the horizontal fire separation between the units, and that can cut down on costs a lot.
Interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm going to try to get some photos of them, but effectively what these look like from our, Toronto lens are effectively four row houses. Two at the ends, two in the middle, and then you have, main, second, and third floor, all one unit, and then below that, a basement apartment. So, effectively, four pretty spacious, I'd say family-sized units, and then, the basements in some cases could be one or two bedrooms. And so it's very interesting because in Toronto, we don't have this type of side by side duplex, at least not in any meaningful way that I've seen. pretty much all the multiplexes here are stacked, so if it's a fourplex, it'll be just like one unit per floor. So it's very interesting to see that type of housing being built again, because I think the positive thing with a lot of these multiplexes is that they're actually building larger units, which at least in Toronto, we haven't really built very much of. So that's super interesting. Now, what have you been seeing? And I've tried to find data on this, and it's actually quite hard. And I don't know if you have any data, but number of permits or the effect of these. I mean, I certainly see a lot being proposed and marketed, but is there any data on the number of permits that have been issued for six or eight plexes in Edmonton?
Yeah, so to get this data, there's been a few staff reports that might be buried in council meeting minutes. You can go directly to the building permit data or the development permit data. And from some of this, I've crunched some of the numbers myself, going into the meeting that we had, the council meeting that was had in July, just to bring a little bit more information to the debate. And so it started off pretty slow in 2024, where the new typologies of fiveplexes to eightplexes permitted just over 1,000 homes in the core mature neighborhoods where uh, the new consolidated zone was mostly covers. In 2025, as of June of this year, when I last looked at the data, we were at a run rate of over 2,500 homes through the an effect of these changes in mature neighborhoods. So we don't have a great data on completions yet. From my brief survey, I did a bike ride around the 5 neighborhoods around me, all of them mature neighborhoods, and only 1 out of 15 were 7 or 8, 6 to 8 plexes were actually built yet. The rest were either holes in the ground or just doing framing. But at least this is an idea of the pipeline that's either going to be probably completed now, hopefully soon, or else they'll be stuck through the winter or next year as well. So those are the direct effects, and of course you can math it out, take 2,500 divided by 8 or up to 8, and that will give you an idea of the number of permits. So a few hundred permits, building permits each year, and few thousand homes.
So the 2,500, are those permits or starts? Permit, yeah, I think you said they're permits, right?
Those are building permits, yes.
Okay. All right. I mean, that's still a pretty high number. I mean, even if not all of these is going to be built, I mean, Edmonton doesn't, I mean, relative to what Edmonton builds and completes each year, I would think that's like actually pretty high volume of permits being issued.
Yeah, that's completely accurate. It's a high number of units being high number of units, especially in the core neighborhoods, the mature neighborhoods that have a lot higher demand, um, compared to some of the other areas. We're at the point where mature neighborhoods are seeing almost almost equal number of units permitted as the new greenfield areas, which is something Edmonton has been trying to achieve for a while, trying to balance outward growth with intensification. And so this has been a big step forward in allowing that. Um, there's also some knock-on effects that you can find. Once you have access to that data, you can cross-reference that with where transit is being built or where it exists. And I found that 43% of these 7 to 8 plexes are within 800 meters distance from transit. So that's about a 15-minute walk. And I know from the Toronto perspective, this might not seem like a lot. I know there's a lot of transit-oriented development in Toronto, but in the Edmonton context where we have 3 LRT lines, the coverage is not great in Edmonton. Uh, Historically, less than 25% of homes have been built near transit. So this is causing a lot of people to be able to live closer to transit. It's allowing for less parking to be built, and owning a car is a huge expense. So that's just one of the other effects of these policies.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's great, I think I find interesting. I don't know that much about Edmonton, but I mean, I was shocked in what I was kind of looking into it of how many big detached lots there are, kind of so close to the city center, like to the core. Toronto, a lot of people, I mean, it's not particularly dense, but you don't have 50-foot detached lots that are 10 minutes to downtown. Like it just doesn't exist, right? And I think that's kind of one of the interesting things with Edmonton, and obviously, more density to have, more people closer to the city, is obviously seems like a kind of a smart idea. Now, that of course is a biased statement because we're seeing a ton of pushback right now. And of course, aside from the traditional pushback of people who just don't want any new housing. Like, maybe you can unpack some of the common arguments that you're seeing and hearing. And in particular, I've seen some counselors talk about potentially making changes to, mid-block or interior lots. And what is behind that? What are they arguing? What are they thinking? Maybe you can kind of unpack some of the thinking and grievances behind those types of properties.
Yeah, so there has been some pushback, as usually happens when you allow more housing in certain areas that have not seen it much growth for years. Generally, the complaints I've spent time in housing advocacy. They're not really anything new. It's the stuff that you would usually hear, like this is too much too fast. You're gonna ruin the character of the neighborhood. The infrastructure can't handle it. The shadowing, privacy, the houses are too big. Some variation of those complaints. And so, as you said, this year is an election year in Edmonton, and councillors are a little bit scared of the opposition, and they have tried to make changes to mid-block row houses. And in July, they held a public hearing, and a lot of it passed. So the stuff I was mentioning before, where about building depth, having a limit on number of side entrances, all of that was essentially work to restrict the building envelope to make it smaller in
Mm,
a pretty significant way. And that passed in July. What did not pass was reducing the hard cap on the number of units from 8 to 6.
mm.
So up to 8 units
Interesting.
is still allowed on every lot, provided you have 75 square meters of lot area per dwelling unit.
Okay, so but I mean, just to unpack that a little bit, I mean, I'm not a planning expert and I don't know Edmonton perfectly well, but I can understand that municipalities can, I mean, in theory, allow eightplexes, but introduce so many roadblocks that it becomes economically unfeasible to build an eightplex in a mid block. So is that what has happened, or were the policy changes reasonable and will still allow technically and practically 8 units to be built?
Yeah, so I think it's hard to tell
Okay.
just yet because the permits or the data hasn't been rolling in. From what I can tell is that the changes that they made will definitely, I mean, when you're reducing the size of a building, we'll definitely see less eightplexes.
But how did
And
they
they,
reduce the size of the building? What was the change to reduce the size again? Was it the
so
depth?
they reduced the building depth. It used to be a flat 30 meters
Mhm.
that you could build into your depth. Um, I think it was 50, yeah, flat 30 meters plus the rear setback. And now it's 25 meters or 50% of the lot depth, whatever is less. So that's a pretty big change right there. So that was the biggest one, but they also increased the side setbacks as well, so making the building narrower. Um, and they also reconfigured the entrances. I don't think that one's a big change, but they limited the number of side entrances per side to two. So you don't have so that's a slight reconfiguration of what the building would look like from the outside.
So
Um,
limiting side entrances to two, because I think that's also one thing I saw that was a little bit, I mean, and I could be wrong, but I think I remember seeing some what are effectively row houses, but the fronts were kind of facing the side of the property rather than the front of the property. So if you think of it as like a long rectangular property, you'd imagine the front is obviously, kind of facing the street, but they were kind of configured the other way. I don't know if I maybe that's a one-off, but I wonder if this is kind of one of the reasons why they did that. Like why, I guess they're thinking is maybe they don't want four townhouses facing the neighbor's lot. Is that kind of the thinking?
yeah, that was kind of the thinking. They wanted, um, in response to some of that opposition, they wanted it to address some of those physical concerns that they were hearing. Um, what it looked like from the outside, um, its configuration, without trying to go too much onto the inside. How many units are there actually on the inside there? So
Hmm.
that's what they were looking at.
Interesting. So, I mean, uh, not to play devil's advocate. I mean, do you think there's anything valid in what they're saying? I mean, again, I'm not an expert. When I looked at some of these, I thought this looks a little ridiculous the way these are fronting. But, is there anything reasonable with at least some of the changes? Obviously, maybe they probably went too far by restricting the size, you know what I mean? Because that makes it economically unfeasible. But are there any of the changes that you think were maybe a not bad idea in what they're kind of proposing?
Yeah, um, there were some other minor changes that they made to design, like having more windows on the front of the house. As you said, like these are side by side ones. So having more glazing, having more room on the side if you're building a side entrance to allow for more accessibility. Some of these paths were actually, to enter the house were actually pretty small. And the side entrances one, I I don't know where I fall on this. It, you know, doesn't seem like a huge deal, but I understand you want to have some entrances on the front. Some single family homes from 50 years ago had only side entrances, so
Fair. That's fair.
but if you want to build entrances on the front, so I can understand where that's coming from. I can understand where some of the concerns are coming from. These, as you said, these are neighborhoods that near downtown for 50 years, they've only had single family homes, and now there's a few that are popping up. Um, it's worth keeping in note, though, that putting this in context, that the numbers for completion, not completions, I should not misspeak here, but the numbers for units permitted might be huge or seem huge, but the actual number of properties within each neighborhood, they're actually not a lot. The most the neighborhood where these have been built the most, uh, maybe only 2% of properties are being redeveloped, and most is less than 1%. We're talking about a handful out of 1,000 properties per neighborhood. So there's a lot of opposition coming because you're moving from zero or negative growth to maybe slightly positive growth. And that can seem like a big change, uh, you, especially when there's a hole in the ground in your neighborhood and you don't know what it's like. You haven't seen this ever before.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think it's, with all these, you got to imagine these low-rise neighborhoods, 60-foot lots, everything is like Pleasantville, you know what I mean? Like everyone probably has their massive, massive yards, massive driveways. All of a sudden there's an 8-unit apartment building next to them. They're in shock. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think um, the municipality's goal is to think about how they want the city to be and how they want to grow over the next 20 years. And I think design policies around that rather than designing policies around what is most comfortable and convenient for the people who currently live there. And it seems like Edmonton's trying to do that while trying to strike some some balance with obviously some of the complaints they're hearing. So hopefully
Yeah.
that moves forward.
And that's exactly what's happening, right? Like an average neighborhood won't even see if you live in an average mature neighborhood at the even at the current rates in 2025, which has been much faster than 2024, you're not even going to see one of these multiplexes on your street for, around 20 years. So on your street, um, this is really the slow incremental change that, as you said, it tries to strike a balance between uh, the need for more housing supply and what existing residents uh, are able to pallet, I guess I would say.
Mhm. That's great. One thing I wanted to ask you, I believe with the Eightplex policies, Edmonton has removed any requirements for parking. Is that correct? Like Toronto?
So Edmonton actually removed parking requirements. They call it open option parking before Toronto did. They did this in 2020. So this was a separate stream of work where they removed parking requirements for residential uses. So it's turned into a market-driven approach where developers, based on what they think will sell or what will rent out, they choose to provide uh, parking on that basis. So staff did do a one-off report. I'm still trying to get the data to look at it myself, but they did a one-off report on these new multiplexes since 2024 and how much parking they were providing. And generally, what they found is that parking is provided at a rate of uh, half a stall per unit. So for an eightplex, for example, you'd have 4 units of parking in provided privately, generally in the back in the form of a parking pad or garage. It is worth noting, though, one thing that might blow people's minds from Toronto is that street parking is completely free in Edmonton in residential areas. That means that you can park as many cars as you want for free on the street. And that leads to the predictable outcome of people using their garages, whether it's provided for car storage or not, for a workshop or car store or something that's not there to store cars, and then just parking their cars on the street. And so even existing residents who have cars will do that. And so that has created some parking problems in limited areas. But, if you don't charge for parking, if it's free, it's probably a foregone conclusion that you're going to end up with parking problems as people are just going to use the free storage they have on public property.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's positive that they're including some parking because, while obviously removing parking requirements is good, it doesn't, I mean, eliminate the need for parking. And I suspect, in the example you gave where a lot of these eightplexes are, kind of larger family sized townhomes above grade and apartments on the lower level, it seems like probably they're, including one spot for the big units and probably no parking for the basement apartments, which would be probably, I'd say, kind of typical even here. I mean, the other thing is, even the streets there, I mean, it's not like Toronto. Toronto, if you're trying to do this in urban areas with no parking, I mean, there is no street. Like, it's so hard to park on the street. I got to imagine in Edmonton, most homeowners have private driveways in these neighborhoods. They don't even park on the street, right? I would assume in most
Well,
of these neighborhoods.
it's a bit of a mix. Most homeowners in the mature neighborhoods have some kind of parking pad or garage behind their house that they access from the alleys
Hmm.
that are ubiquitous in these neighborhoods. But whether they use it for actually parking their car is another matter.
Hmm.
So there's some very specific areas like around the university or around the hospitals where um, or in some other neighborhoods where there have been some parking supply issues because there's no permit. There's only permits in specific areas. Um, but yeah, as you were saying, in the vast majority of Edmonton, there's really no parking supply issue, whether it's on the street or in garages. There's really no problem to find parking there, uh, whether you're on the street or you're parking behind your house.
Awesome. Now, before we wrap up, I'll kind of leave you with one question, and I don't know if you have or can recommend any insights that kind of Toronto can take from the lessons in Edmonton as the city of Toronto is looking at expanding multiplexes. Do you have any kind of thoughts or recommendations based on the experiences in Edmonton that might be helpful for Toronto's housing supply?
Yeah, I think Edmonton shows that when you design a policy to succeed, it can actually increase the construction rates. It can actually increase the number of homes you are permitting. And so my advice to Toronto would, as you're reviewing your multiplex policies, would be think about what is actually feasible to build and then just do it. Make it happen. And if there is demand to live in those areas, then the construction will follow.
Beautiful. Great advice. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us about all the things going on in Edmonton, some of the lessons and insights for us in Toronto. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, John.